Welcome again to Dollarization in Action. I'm sorry that this video took a little bit to be made. Unfortunately, I've been very busy with my work and I also had a little technical difficulty, but here we are. And today's topic is that dollarization is a trade reform besides being a monetary reform. In this video, we're going to show you why. Let's start. So we want to start by saying that here we expand on the idea presented in the previous video about that at the end of the day, a consistently positive trade balance is the only feasible way for a dollarized economy or a dollarized country to support this monetary system in the long run and potentially achieve economic development. That is something that we say in our book. That's on page 110. Again, the book is not available in English yet. It's probably not going to be available in English for a while, but we still want to expose these ideas in more than one language because we think that this is relevant for a broader audience than just the Spanish-speaking audience of Ecuador and Latin America. So this part here is about a comment that we made in Spanish, and that becomes a little bit relevant for the English version as well, because so what happens here? Ecuador has big problems reporting data, and basically here we can see one of them. It's okay for a country to separate oil exports from everything else, because obviously when you're an oil dependent economy like Ecuador is, it's very relevant to separate it, especially if the oil companies are run by the state like it is here. So you can basically have a separation of a state-run companies that export, the oil companies, and everybody else, the private companies. But Ecuador does something else, and that is to separate products between traditional products and non-traditional products in a totally arbitrary way. That is something that we have protested in the past, that we think that is totally out of date. There are products here like canned tuna. It says canned fish, but it's canned tuna. We don't can any other fish. Well, we do mackerel, but that's marginal. But what I'm saying is that that's an industry that was old when I was born. So how can it be a non-traditional industry at this point? And we're going to see later that that industry alone exported almost $1 billion last year. So it's not like it's a small company or it's a small industry. The same with flowers, the same with mining products that are not oil, with wood, with some fruits like mangoes and pineapples. Golden pineapples here in Ecuador have always been a big export item, so to call them non-traditional doesn't make any sense to us. So how are we going to prove that dollarization is a trade reform? So we are going to use deduction to go from the general to the particular. And in this case, the particulars of the issue are going to be the predictions about trade reforms that have been exposed, have been presented by David Ricardo, Smith, and Hesh Caroline. And we will contrast these predictions of what should happen when a country has a trade reform with the results that Ecuador has obtained the last 20 years, and we are going to draw conclusions from that. And we will also talk at the end of the video about a concept called trade hyper-openness, meaning that is too open in the economy, and that is taking a step forward towards the discussion about signing a free trade agreement with the United States that has been present with a big emphasis in Ecuador lately because of the elections that are happening and all the talk about how should the economy be run in the future. So let's start with the first prediction. This is David Ricardo, and he says that when markets open, the prediction should be that two things should happen. First, that Ecuador's foreign trade should grow significantly after dollarization, and after taking this reform, and two, that this openness should improve the general quality of life of the average Ecuadorian. This is something again that we write down in the book in page 150. And again, the book is in Spanish. I apologize for that, but still it's good to know that it's there. So let's see here. We can see that exports before dollarization, pre-dollarization, grew at a pace of 77.6%, and that is including the oil boom up to a certain point, because the 70s was the greatest expansion point for the oil boom, but the 80s had a lot of that too. But post-dollarization's exports have actually grown by 340%. What is important to notice, we're not going to delve a lot on this in this particular video, but what is important to notice is that before dollarization, imports grew at a pace of 73.77%, while after dollarization, they have definitely boomed at a rate of 550% since 2000, since the year 2000. So we can also see that the GDP has grown. The growth rate was around 9.86% before dollarization, and it has been, I mean, the growth between 1980 and 1999, basically very little growth. But post-dollarization, the GDP has grown nominally by almost 500%. And we can also see the weight of foreign trade over GDP. We can see that it was basically, we're talking about that it was 30% of the economy before dollarization, and it's being 46% of the economy after dollarization. So there are some more ideas that we could talk about this, but we are not going to mention them. We're just going to go straight up and notice that what's happened is that the trade balance in Ecuador has actually turned into a negative tendency after dollarization, when before dollarization it was actually kind of stable, kind of rounding up to zero, not winning, not losing. But this is the most important part of this point, and that is that we can see that after the year 2000, when dollarization was taken, foreign trade in Ecuador has grown exponentially. I mean, we can see that with the vertical dotted line. To the left is the period before dollarization, to the right the period after dollarization. We can see both exports of oil and exports of non-oil products have grown very consistently. Indeed, oil exports have gone down since 2014, but the private exports have kept their pace. So that demonstrates a lot of what Ricardo said, because he was talking about comparative and absolute advantages in trade, but also goes to the next prediction that we said, that in the social wealth of Ecuador, we can see that before dollarization, Ecuador had a GDP per capita of about $5,000, 540, 5,400. And while after dollarization, the GDP per capita is of about 11,000. We can see that also the, um, the, the, the income for the lowest quintile was $1,700 before dollarization, and now it's 5,900. So basically, the poorest people in Ecuador are getting more money now nominally than they were, that the richest, the regular, the average people were getting before dollarization. So definitely there's been a growth in social capital. We can also see that there's been an evolution in the Gini coefficient. It has gone down, meaning that income, the distribution of income in Ecuador has become more egalitarian. We can see that it was about 0.60 before dollarization, and it has gone down to around 0.47. It has gone down sometimes even lower than that, closer to 0.45. So you could basically say that it has gotten almost a third more fairer, if you want to put it that way in those terms. Poverty has also gone down in Ecuador in this time. So we can see that by the curves over here. So we go to the second prediction. This comes from Adam Smith. And Smith basically said that based on Ricardo's idea of comparative advantages, well, Ricardo came after Smith, so Ricardo's idea were based on Smith. But remember that Smith basically talked about specialization, the division of labor. So what happened was that whenever there was an economy that opened to trade, what was going to happen was that you were going to have more division of labor, and at the same time the economy specializing more into whatever they were producing. So this we mentioned in page 156 of the book. Again, the book is not available in English. I'm sorry about that, but this is the way that we transmit the knowledge that we gathered there. Um, so we can see here that there's an export comparison before and after dollarization. Basically, what we can tell, again, this is the reason why we dispute the separation between non-traditional and traditional items, because it makes it look like it's closer than they should be. But basically, traditional industries in Ecuador are the ones that have economies of scale. They are the ones that are able to compete at a global level. So they are the ones that are going to expand it the most. And we can see that in this graph from the Central Bank of Ecuador basically tells us that. I mean, we can see that the traditional exports, which are the exports based on those industries that have economies of scale, have gone through the roof in this period after dollarization, while the exports of non-traditional products, the exports of items that don't reach those economic scale, have leveled off and actually have started to come down, which is something that we present in the book, the reasons why there's a crowding out effect. Remember that Ecuador is a very small country, so it's not like we can have 20, 30 different industries going on at the same time, because especially if they are based on land or resources on the coastline, there's not going to be enough of it. So this is basically what the prediction says, and this is basically what's happening. The third prediction that comes from Hester Link and the initial endowment. So basically they explain the what. What is Ecuador exporting? Basically, Ecuador exports are concentrated in basic extractive industries and reveal Ecuador's Achilles heel, which is not an industry, and we don't have any industries that are based on human capital, nor technology, nor knowledge, and very little value is added. Indeed, we mentioned how in many years of this period after dollarization, Ecuador has gotten zero patents of any kind, not intellectual, not industrial patents, whereas countries like China get 400,000 patents a year. The US gets anywhere between 300,000 and 400,000. We don't produce any knowledge in Ecuador. But also you can see in this graph that comes from the Federation of Exporters, what Ecuador exports to the world: shrimp, banana, cocoa. We don't export chocolate, we export cocoa. Fish, we export coffee. Uh, Oils, there are vegetable oils, canned tuna, flowers, etc. So these are all natural, basic, extractive industries. In this graph, we reshape a little bit the exports of Ecuador based on what we believe are the clusters, the real traditional industries, the ones that have economic scale at the global scale. And we can see that 91% of the exports of Ecuador are concentrated in these 9 industries: coffee, vegetable oils, tuna, cocoa, flowers, canned tuna, banana, shrimp, and the oil industry. So the concentration is really, really high. As I was telling some people, that my job here, that is not doing these videos, because this is not a full-time job, but my job here in Ecuador is actually working with an import company, and they basically import hardware products. And this company alone has a catalog of over 16,000 products that they import, where you can see that 91% of the exports of Ecuador are probably concentrated in about 300 products and no more than that. And that is assuming that some of these products are diversified, because they are probably not. You can try to separate shrimp between peeled shrimp and headless shrimp and cooked shrimp, but it's so much that you can do about it without adding any more value to it. And it's very little value, the one that is being added to that one, and basically to any other products. I mean, banana, as far as I know, has no other presentation than the banana itself. Well, I heard that there's some exports of organic bananas. Probably that's as far as it goes. So, and this takes us to the last concept, the concept of trade hyper openness. Okay, so what happens when a country opens too much its trade? What it starts becoming socially harmful, because what happens is that you start replacing a lot of the national industries or a lot of nascent industries, industries that are just starting up. You start replacing those with imports. So when you do that, you end up creating a situation like what happened in Venezuela. Venezuela had so much wealth from oil that they decided to start importing basically everything else. When oil crashed, there was nothing left. So that's exactly what you're seeing in Venezuela right now. Venezuelans have nowhere to go. They don't have any industry, not even the few clusters that we have here in Ecuador. And the situation is very desperate over there precisely because of this. So there are two uh, criterion that meet regarding trade hyper openness, how we measure it. The first one is that the whole foreign trade of a country has to be created of its GDP by 125.4%. Remember that when you're calculating GDP, the last item, the last point is exports minus imports. This is asking to add exports plus imports, so meaning that you can have a GDP, a foreign trade that is higher than 100% of GDP if you add them up. Because if exports and imports were of the same size, then it will equal to zero, and the calculation of the GDP will basically be everything else. It will be investments, government spending, and consumption, and that's it. But if you add those items up, for example, in the case of small island countries or countries that are basically based on trade like Panama, probably you will have a GDP where trade is higher than 124% of its GDP. That's not the case of Ecuador, but the second criteria might be applicable to the country, and that is that imports meet or exceed 33.16% of GDP. We can see in this graph here, Ecuador has been very close to that line several times in this period, specifically in 2008, 2010, 2011, and 2012. A little bit in 2013, when prices of oil were so high and there was so much money coming in that it was compensated with a huge surge in imports that drove us close to the 33.16% of imports, where according to this concept, it will start destroying jobs at the national level and will be socially harmful. That's why we have to be careful about signing free trade agreements that could actually turn out to be harmful. We are going to see it later. For those of you who have the book, you're going to see that that's the case that happened to Peru, that happened to Chile when they signed the free trade agreement with the United States, the same to Colombia. So that's why we are putting those like a warning. We're going to be talking about that later. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like it, subscribe, like, share, drop me a message, because I don't, that until now, I haven't seen anything from anybody that speaks English. And also I want to let you know that there's a video that we're going to be doing these days that is basically a political opinion of what's happening in Ecuador. So I'm not going to be translating that one into English. That's going to be an entirely Spanish-based video. We are going to continue doing these videos that are based on academic concepts. We are going to continue doing them in both in Spanish and English. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a great one. See you soon.